everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is a special episode of Author Chat, Author AMA. One, because it's a good friend, Seth Ring, who's a fellow author in the lit RPG space, but also because he and I are getting over sickness, we had to bump it back from Sunday evening to tonight. So thank you so much for those of you guys who have tuned in. Also, a special thank you to the Patreon supporters of The Dying Breed. We've got Warrior Bernard, Fighters Maxwell, Foster, and Q, and of course, Defender LG. Thank you so much, you guys, for your support, helping keep the movement going, helping keep everything going with our writing. So without further ado, Seth, I want you just tell us who you are, man, because I know who you are, but I don't think my fans may know of who you are.
Sure. So I am Seth. I'm a lit RPG fantasy writer. I have a number of books out. I've been doing this for a little bit, and I actually just finished my 25th book, and I think my 22nd book was just published, something like that. So
huge congratulations to you on that.
Thank you. I have a couple books out, but no, I write fantasy lit RPG. I love the genre, and I'm starting to branch out into some other sort of subgenres, but a lot of it I'm keeping inside the lit RPG space. So I'm pretty excited for what's coming.
Also, a huge congratulations from Richie Stevens over the co-anchor of Stats on Stats podcast. Yeah. And Richie is an awesome person, of course, who we got to run into Richie at Dragon Con just this last week.
It was super fun, man.
Yeah.
Dragon Con was such a blast, but then the sickness.
Yeah. And I feel really bad because, I got to see a Dragon Con.
Yeah.
We're talking it up and going over the scheduling.
Yeah.
I didn't even pick up one of your books, especially your newest book. So that's where I was
okay.
What am I going to put on the bookshelf? So I made sure I got Wayne from Letterkenny, Puddles from Oregon Ducks, and of course Mando to greet us. So
I love it. Love it.
TJ, it's Stats Prime. My bad, dude. My bad. Stats Prime. Okay. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, I actually have known Seth now almost a full year. Mm-hmm. And he and I met in Las Vegas at a amazing convention called 20 Books to 50K. And this is the last year where it'll be known as that. And I remember we're going downstairs to like the food court area. I think we were all lined up for milkshakes. And I don't know if it was Matt Dinneman or if it was someone, but the group was like, and this is, of course, the group of lit RPG authors where we're getting milkshakes. And once one goes,
that's right,
the majority follows. So we're sitting
down. We're
like
lemmings. We just chase.
Yeah. And so Seth and I sit down and I look over, I'm like, hey, I'm TJ, and I'm Seth. I'm like, are you an author? Yeah, I am. And at the time, I think you had like 15 books or more under your belt. And I had no idea who you were. And that's how our friendship started.
That's okay, though. I find that happens a lot when you go to these conventions because, authors are just people, right? We write and we write these stories that give us sort of this level of fame or mystique that's beyond ordinary, but really we're just very ordinary. And I think that most of us, especially in the lit RPG space, still think of ourselves as fans more than we think of ourselves as authors. So I think that's totally normal. And I think that that's also one of the reasons that we get to know each other because everybody's so friendly.
Yeah. I think that's because, I started in fantasy. I started writing the Dying Breed series. I think very similar to you. We have fantasy stuff that we write. And now I've written some lit RPG stuff. For those that are not very familiar with lit RPG, when they come into the space, it's like, oh yeah, that guy's an author and this. And I think a lot of people are blown away with how genuine the authors in the community is to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. There's just a very friendly vibe. It's sort of like, it's like finding a gaming group in a lot of ways. It's like, come sit down at the table and let's play in these worlds. And I just think that there's a very friendly atmosphere.
Absolutely. So let's kind of back up a little bit. Tell us a little bit of who Seth is. Where'd you grow up? What were some of your hobbies as a kid and your progression in your career to this point?
All right, sure. So I grew up in West Africa, in Ghana, which is
Okay.
um, a English-speaking country, though there are 60 native languages in Ghana. They were a
Wow.
former British colony, and so most everybody speaks English as one of their national languages, along with Ashanti and Ewe. But because I grew up in this place surrounded by all of these languages, or rather, I grew up in this place surrounded by all of these languages because my dad was a linguist, and so
Okay.
he was studying language, and so books have always been a very important part of just my whole life experience.
Hmm.
But with growing up overseas came a lot of travel, and just sort of by virtue of when in my parents' careers I was born, I ended up traveling a lot as a kid, moving a lot. I was in 13 different schools by the time I hit ninth grade.
Holy
So I was
cow.
I was constantly moving. And the thing that sort of anchored me through all of that, apart from my family, was getting to read. Because the reality is that, you know, Tolkien's world of Middle Earth is the same whether you're reading it in America or in Africa. Like it doesn't change. And so I sought refuge a lot in books and specifically in worlds that I could really sink my teeth into and could imagine myself in.
Hmm.
I wasn't really much of a writer though. I didn't like I liked verbal storytelling, but I was a pretty bad writer, just like mechanically, and so it was
Okay.
it was pretty painful for me. Um, I don't know why. I wrote very very slowly and just uh, I didn't like it. So I never
Right.
thought of like, oh, I could write books as a career. Plus, when I don't know how it is now, but like when we were growing up, if you were like, I want to be a writer when I grow up, everybody was like, sure, but that like won't pay the bills. You could maybe do that on the side, but like you can't make a career out of that, right? And
Right.
so
Yeah.
growing up, my interest in in books and in fantasy was all in just consuming it so that I would have some sort of stability in my life, which is kind of a weird thing. But anyway,
So a question to interject here,
yeah,
because I'm really curious. Growing up in a very different culture and
yeah,
society and stuff,
yeah.
was there like a lot of lore or a lot of folk tales that were verbally
Mhm.
told and shared that you would say really gave you completely different ideas and perspectives from the traditional
I
stuff?
would, one of the things that I have realized after encountering a lot of different cultures, living in a lot of different cultures, having friends from a lot of different cultures, is that humans are humans.
Mhm.
And we have a lot of cultural differences. But when you start to dig past the sort of surface level cultural differences,
Mhm.
the way we construct our understanding of the world is actually very, very similar. People are concerned about the same things,
Mhm. Yeah.
and they might approach it slightly differently, and they might have a different sense of what respect is or what honor is, or they might have a slightly different understanding of um, of how someone should conduct themselves in a given situation, based on
Mm.
where they're
Yeah.
from and their cultural context. But at the end of the day, people are people. They want the
Mhm.
same things. They have the same um, loves. They have the same hates. They have the same desires. And and so I didn't really find that their stories were too different from ours. Now, at the same time, I absolutely loved the Anansi stories, Anansi the spider.
Okay.
And for anybody who's not familiar with Anansi, Anansi is a trickster in African folklore who is also quite foolish. And so he exemplifies this sort of foolish cunning, and so he's constantly tricking everybody around him, and everything is constantly going bad for him, right? So he'll trick somebody, and then he will, as a result, suffer for it. And
Interesting.
so I always really liked those stories. Those were some of my favorite growing up.
Hmm.
But my mother also, highly educated and very committed to the classics. And so growing up, I think by the time I was maybe 13, I had read most of the sort of classics of Western literature. And that was a strange mix.
Sure.
My parents also collected Louis L'Amour, who's a Western author, and Georgette Heyer, who invented the Regency romance genre. And so those were some of my favorite books, along with Edgar Rice Burroughs. And then I discovered Terry Pratchett,
Yeah.
Isaac Asimov, and sort of classic sci-fi. A lot of old sci-fi, so like Jules Verne, H.G. Wells. So a lot of my influences were these sort of mainstays of Western literature in a bunch of
Okay.
different genres.
Okay.
Um, but one of the things that I found was that I was immensely attracted to pulp as a style of writing. And
Okay.
so for anybody who's not familiar, pulp is, you might think of like noir detective stories or westerns, or um, Edgar Rice Burroughs is probably one of the best examples. John Carter of Mars,
Okay.
Tarzan. These were all pulp stories that were written um, in magazines and distributed throughout the world. And you would get an issue of the magazine, and it would have a bunch of chapters from a bunch of different stories. And then you'd have to buy it again the next week, right, in order to continue reading.
Right. Yeah.
And so they were paid
We
based
talk
on
about
whether,
web serial series
yes,
where you go online to read
same
the
thing,
series, but
same
this
thing.
was like the original where you had to get the magazine to continue the story. And you
Correct.
normally, you go to great grandpa's house or grandpa's house and there's a stack of
That's right.
magazines.
That's absolutely right. And it was called pulp because of the paper that it was printed on.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So that's why the genre got its name, because of the paper that the magazines were printed with. And it was a poor quality, just cheap, paper. But as a storyteller, you had to be good enough to keep people hooked. And so it
Right.
was the original web serial. And so as I grew, I transitioned naturally from reading, Louis L'Amour and Edgar Rice Burroughs straight into web serials as they were starting to be translated. Um, so Asian web serials, and then Russian lit RPG when it started being translated into English. And I devoured, everything I could.
Right.
Again, was always just a really big reader. I loved, no matter what it was, I really loved to read it.
So you're growing up in a completely different country.
Hmm.
When did you come back to the States? Like what was that transition of life, and was it a pretty culture shock reverse almost of coming into like, hey, this is American society and it's completely different from what you've known?
Yes, absolutely. So culture shock exists no matter what.
Hmm.
I don't think that there's anyone who doesn't suffer some level of culture shock when they move practically permanently into a new culture.
Right.
That's just sort of the way of it. And I moved to the US in 2000,
Okay.
and the US was it was at the very end of the year 2000, and then in 2001 the US underwent one of the most formative cultural incidents in its history with
Right.
9/11. And that added a whole new layer of turmoil to my life, because one of my uncles was actually in the second tower and didn't make it
Oh
out.
my gosh.
And but that combined with my culture shock, and then everybody around me undergoing this sort of rapid evolution in their culture, it was just sort of a wild time, um, all around. And
Right.
I dealt with it by doing the things that I knew how to do. I went and I read every Piers Anthony book that I could find, And then I would find a new author and I would read everything. I read every single Dorothy L. Sayers book that exists.
Mm.
So I would just find an author and I would read their entire catalog. Um, and
Jeez.
I read pretty fast. So
I was about to
normally,
say, I can assume you do.
yeah. So normally I would read let's say a 400 or 500 page book in like 3 hours.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah, a little pretty quick. But it allowed me, that's how I gave sort of vent to my feelings, is to sink them
Mm,
into other worlds and sort of become a detached observer. And
right.
through that, I was able to sort of become a detached observer of life around me to,
Mm,
try to make sense of all of these weirdos and all of the weird things they were doing. Even though, as my wife likes to remind me, because she met me during that period of my life, I was the weirdo. Um, but perspective.
I was
Perspective.
about to say, because that was my next question, because if I remember correctly, you were in big data analytics in your first career.
Sort of. So
Okay.
my first actual career was printing T-shirts in a T-shirt shop.
Nice.
Yeah. So I worked for a fantastic company called Earth, Sun, Moon, that did custom T-shirts, and I worked out for 6 years and was so miserable. Not the company was great. I was just miserable. So I taught myself how to program,
Okay.
and I got into application development and like back end application development. And I did that for a while. And then I got into sales because I like people, and like sitting in a cubicle for, 9 to 11 hours a day programming was just like killing my soul. Um, but I got into sales. And then during that period is when I had started writing. Um,
Okay.
for some mental health reasons, and uh, as a way to like my coping mechanisms of burying myself. Um, my coping mechanisms of burying myself in in other worlds was
Hmm.
just starting to fail, like because reality was a little bit too hard. It was
It was too current apocalyptic.
Yeah, pretty much. And I
Yeah.
was like, man, I can't escape it, right?
Mm,
And so I was like, well, I love telling stories. And at the
hmm.
time I was having a lot of trouble finding stories that had an underlying theme of hope. Everything,
Ooh,
and
interesting.
this was a period when web serials were still in their infancy. And
Hmm.
so everything was like really edge lord. Everything, and some people would argue we're still in that period, but it was way worse back then. It was way worse. And I was having a lot of trouble finding things to read were that had that underlying theme of hope. And I was reading all of these stories that were like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 chapters long, right? And it was starting to sort of bring me down. And I didn't like that. And so I thought, what? This doesn't look so hard. I can do it. I could write this story. And well, it turned out to be a lot harder than I thought. Um,
As I
which
think all aspiring authors realize, like
yes,
within the first chapter one, they're like, I got 700 words down and I'm exhausted.
that's right. And if I'm, aiming for 100,000, that's a long way to go. And if you're
Yeah.
writing epic, that's a really long way to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was tough. But I stuck with it. I was on Royal Road at the time. That's where I had been reading a lot, and so I was like, you
Hmm.
know what? I'll write my own story. And I started, and people were like, "This sucks." And yeah, that was my experience for
So
probably two
let's go
years.
back a little bit
Sure, sure.
because so you had kids at the time when you started
Yes,
writing, if I remember correctly. So
that's correct.
you have two.
I had two at the time. I have
Okay.
four currently.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you.
So two more editions. So you're grinding away at sales, which I know sales can
Yeah.
be extremely taxing, where
Yeah.
you get a hit reward, and then maybe for a whole week, 2 weeks, you've got nothing but misfires.
Yep.
So you're grinding away and you're coming back. You're reading these web serials on Royal Road, which now we're both on,
Hmm.
um, and you're getting beaten up there of like, this sucks.
Yep.
What was driving you to keep going and being like, you know what, I'm going to keep showing up every night?
Yeah.
You're trying to be a dad, spend time with your kids, but for some reason you kept coming back. And where was that resiliency? How was that going for you?
That's an interesting question. So it gets into that gets into dangerous territory. I'll try
Okay.
really hard not to get on my soapbox, but I absolutely believe in principle based living, and I
Okay.
think for everybody, the principles that they need in order to be successful are slightly different. I think all of us are naturally attuned to certain principles that come to us easily, and others do not. But I do think that there are a couple of universal principles that are helpful,
Okay.
especially if you were like me in a position where you had no skill and there's nothing you can there seems to be no path forward, right? So
Okay.
to rewind a little bit, I was working at this t-shirt place and I was printing t-shirts, and I was working 14 to 16 hours a day,
Jeez.
like 6 days a week, right? In order
Yeah.
to provide for my family. And it was pretty brutal. And every single moment that I had outside of that time, I spent playing games, playing TTRPGs or board games with a group of friends, or playing video games. And there came this moment for me when I was sitting in my house staring at a Skyrim loading screen, and I realized all of a sudden that if I didn't make some sort of change in my life, in 10 years, I would be staring at exactly the same screen in exactly the same place, doing exactly the same thing. And that
Yeah.
thought was so terrifying that
Yep.
literally my life changed.
And it's such a deep thought. Like, we could
It,
literally just take a
yeah,
pause and be like, every viewer, go reflect for like 30 seconds on what
yes.
Seth just said.
It really did change my life. But it also it it's curious because what I ended up sort of coming to was something that I had known already, but just had not been applying. And that
Mm.
was that for me, and again, I think everybody's principles are going to have to be are going to be different. But for
Mhm.
me, I needed aggressive humility,
Mm.
ruthless honesty, and
Yep.
relentless improvement. And what kept me writing when people were like, "Hey, this sucks," is my aggressive humility of saying, "Yeah, I'm totally aware. Like, I am
Right.
leaning into this, right? I'm leaning into the suck because I'm very aware. I came into this knowing that I sucked at it. I'm
Hmm.
not trying to be something that I'm not." And
Right.
then you layer that with this ruthless honesty of it sucks and I'm going to find out exactly what sucks about it. So one of the things that I did early on is whenever somebody gave me criticism that I thought was even the remotest bit potentially true, I would say, what's one thing I can do better? And
Yep.
I would literally comment under them, or I would DM them and be like, what's one thing I can do better? How can I improve this? Thanks for pointing this out. How can I
Yep.
improve? Right? And then relentless improvement. Just relentlessly saying, I'm going to try to apply that one thing that they have told me in my writing for my next chapter. I'm not going to go back and fix. Never go back and fix. This is one of my sort of core tenets for writing. Make the next one better.
Yep.
And that I was still very much in that I have to improve my life mindset. And I still, honestly, I haven't lost it.
Right.
I'm still in that place, even though my life is exceedingly different now than it was then.
Right.
But it was just that relentless churn of like, what's one thing I can do better? I know I suck. What's one thing I can do better? And you know what I found? For all of the haters on Royal Road, people, if you actually engage with them and give them the
Mhm.
time of day, not everybody. Some people are just haters. But most people, if you actually engage with them, will tell you what you can improve. And then they'll turn into fans and they'll keep
Yep.
following it to see if you improve it. And if you do improve it, they'll feel like they own a piece of the story in some small way and they'll become loyal fans.
Yep.
And so it was through that process. And actually, the thing that changed my trajectory, because I was entirely in I'm writing for fun. I have a great career that's growing, right? In 2018, I had just become a sales manager. I was doing it, right? I was making
Yeah.
great money.
That's a huge step up.
It is. And I was managing other people and like I was making it. And then somebody in one of the comments on Royal Road, I was still a pretty bad writer. And in one of the comments on Royal Road, somebody said something to the effect of, this story isn't very good, but I can see a glimmer of a story I really want to read. And that just set something off in my mind. I don't know what it was, but it was like a switch just flipped. And I was like, all right, bet. I'm going to find that story and I'm going to write that story and you're going to read it and it's going to be great.
Yeah.
And that's what
it's
led
interesting.
to the Titan
Oh,
series.
sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just to say it was that story. I put all the other ones aside and it was that story that I was like, okay, no, I'm going to turn this into a book. This isn't just going to be a web serial that I'm writing for fun, catharsis. No, this is going to be an awesome series that this guy wants to read.
Right. 100%, man. And, I was actually having a conversation earlier today and we kind of talked about that same exact principle of like, don't go backwards.
Mm-hmm.
You could refine all those things. And then when you get to the very end, you're going to look back like, oh, okay, I need to fix this.
That's right.
And you could even be at book 5 or 7 and you're like, I've learned all these different things. And then you go back to book 4 and you're like, ooh, but you know what? I was about 5% off on this. And I should have done 10%. You're never going to have the perfect story, but you're just going to be able to continue to apply those skills better with each new book.
Yeah. And, there's an important sort of philosophical point here. And that is that if you go back and revise excessively, like go back and edit out continuity errors, go back and before you publish a book, make it the best book you can possibly make it, polish it. I'm not saying don't do that. What I'm saying though, is that if you're constantly worried about writing a perfect book, it supposes that you can. And if you can, that means there will be an end to your journey. There will be a point where you cannot write a better book.
Right.
I don't play that game, right? We play an infinite game. We play a game where I am going to get better and better and better and better and better. And by the time I've put out my 100th book, if I get that far, it's going to be so good that people will talk about it forever.
Yeah. You're gonna get there, man. But it's the same principle.
I do write pretty fast.
Yeah, you do. Same principle that was taught to me by Staff Sergeant DeLeon Acosta, who is Master DC in the Dying Breed series. Basic military training. TJ, is perfection obtainable? No, but it is the pursuit of perfection that you will find excellence. So as long as you are pursuing it,
that's right, you're
gonna continue to find excellence. So
that's right.
And then before I forget the thought, when I finished the book on Royal Road, my book, the Lit RPG, Call Sign Bloodbath, I made sure to put a special thanks as the very last chapter. And I said, even though this book is free, it doesn't mean you didn't pay for it. You paid for it with your time, energy, and effort to read the story. And I just want to make sure I say thank you to all those who commented and everything. And I think it's one of those things that you talk about is when you respond to someone, and thankfully that's one of the things I love about Royal Road is not only can the reader comment, the author can follow up a comment as well.
That's right.
Is that, hey, I'm commenting for a reason. And you know what? Even if I give a comment back response that validates them, that, or not validates, but it's like, I see you.
That's right.
You took the time to comment, and I'm going to at least let you know that I saw you and I am acknowledging you. I think that really goes a long way.
Yeah, I think it does. I think that one of the challenges with our current age is that people don't have the socialization that they used to. And you can really bless someone by engaging with them on something that they're passionate about. And again, I understand the internet there are haters on the internet. Like, we get that. There are people who are commenting just because they want to cause chaos. But the majority of people, even if they comment something negative, all they're doing is looking to engage about something they're passionate about. Especially if they're like, I don't think this is consistent for the character. I don't think this is a good idea. Like, I wish you would have taken the story a different way. Those are awesome opportunities to engage and say, thank you so much for being so invested in my story and my world that you're willing to remove your mask of anonymity and engage on this. So let's engage on it, right? Let's talk about it. And again, just pro tip for any author out there. I know that sometimes we feel very protective of our worlds and of our characters and of our stories. But the best way to create a superfan, bar none, is to allow them to have some voice in your world.
Right.
And it can be a really small thing. It can be as simple as somebody commenting, hey, I bet this is going to come up or this is going to happen. And even if I wasn't going to do that originally, if it's a decent idea, I will almost always incorporate it. Because as soon as that person sees it, as soon as they read it, they're clicked in. It is their story now. They have correctly identified the thing, right?
Yep.
It is now their story. And that's, as authors, what could we ask for better than super engaged readers who care enough to engage with us?
Right. Well, that's where, Brandon said thanks a few seconds ago when we were talking, and, he read Call Sign Bloodbath, which is on Royal Road. And he messaged me and said, hey, what about this? And I was like, and so it was actually while we were at Dragon Con, I'm sitting next to Brian Norden and I show Brian the message. I'm like, dude, I think I really love this idea. And Brian is like, yeah, that's a badass idea. And so that's where I was like, we're doing it. It's just got to be in book 3 because book 2 is already written. So,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So Ryan Maxwell, the power of something positive can never be underestimated. Positive feedback will always be something that drives writers.
Absolutely.
And so here's a great transition because this is something that Ryan also asked, and he has also got some stuff on Royal Road. At what point do you decide to move something from a web serial to a published book? And is there something that lets you know this needs to move over?
So that is a tricky question because every series is going to be slightly different. However, I do think that there is an answer to this. And the answer is, again, apologies for it being nuanced here, but one, how well is it doing on Royal Road? Is it right for that audience or is it better for an Amazon audience? Okay. Yeah. That's a very important sort of metric that you have to understand.
Two completely different audiences.
Yes. Very, very different. Very different. Second, How much do you need the money? Because the less you need the money, the greater your eventual success can be.
Mm.
So the ebook world, I should say the fantasy world on Amazon is currently being dominated by a specific category of people, the Royal Road authors. However, what is often overlooked is just how long a lot of these guys published on Royal Road before they moved over.
Mm.
So a great example of that uh, is Norrit Flood, right? He has been writing Randidly Ghost Town for 7 years. He only moved over to Amazon, I think, last year or the year before.
Mm.
So he took no money for a good while, for the first 2 years, I believe. And then he moved to Patreon. But the fifth book just came out on Amazon or is just coming out. And he has 20 books of content ready to release. The
Insane.
longer you can push the ask, this is a sales tactic just in general. The
Mm.
longer you can push the ask, the more goodwill you can generate, the higher the
Mm.
payout's going to be at the end. Why do those guys
Interesting.
do so well? Well, they do so well because they have literally 10,000 followers on their stories who buy day one on Amazon. Do you know what that does to the algorithm? It just it just cracks it open,
It's a
right? And
rocket.
it is. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, these things are everywhere because Amazon is like, "Oh, day 1 and 10,000 people bought it." Even half of that, 5,000 people bought it. That's like better than most like best sellers just flat out of the gate, right? On a book one, on a new author, no
Hmm.
idea who this person is. And then book two comes out and it crushes. Because guess what? All those people who read the series so long ago are buying it again.
Right.
And
We've
so,
got, let's just say, 1,500 followers for book one. Book two launches. More than likely, the majority are going to come to get book two. And those new people that are seeing book two, oh, wait, this is the second book. Where's the first one? So it's a
that's right.
compounding effect.
Absolutely. But even beyond that, what I think again gets missed is that if somebody is a follower on Royal Road and is still reading after 10 books, they liked the first book, they liked the second book, they liked the third book, they liked all the books.
Right.
So they're going to buy all the books. And so the longer you can push it off, the greater the potential for the payout. And while we have two different audiences, there's more and more crossover happening. There are more and
Mm.
more people who are discovering, who just don't know what Royal Road is, and are
Right.
discovering this kind um, of fantasy on or science fiction on Amazon for the first time.
Right. It's
So
it's still incredible to see. I was at Phoenix Fan Fusion, and I was talking to people like, "Oh, this is a lit RPG story," and they're like, "What is that?" I'm like, "How have
yeah,
you not heard about it at this point?" But
yes,
really, in all reality, lit RPG is still so unknown to an
it's
audience.
so small.
And right
It's
now,
so
you
small.
have 74 to 75,000 stories on Royal Road.
Right.
So there's so much
Yeah.
content out there.
So this is the other thing though. This is the other again, I follow a principle of ruthless honesty, right? I
Mhm.
should add to this. My fourth principle that I live by is sacrificial kindness. I believe we should be kind in all we do, right? And kindness should um, shape all of the other principles.
Mm.
So I say this not to crush anybody, but to be as helpful as I possibly can.
Right.
If you have a story on Royal Road that is not gaining traction, then either you have a complete audience misfit, in which case you probably need to just take it off and take it to Amazon sooner rather than later, right? Don't sort of string it along.
Hmm.
You probably need to take it to Amazon sooner, and you need to engage in more sort of traditional marketing uh, tactics and strategies in order to get the traction you want.
Right.
If you have a story that is not a misfit, like it's actually correct for the Royal Road audience and it is not gaining steam, then either you failed in your Royal Road strategy, because there are specific Royal Road strategies. Either you failed in your Royal Road strategy, or you need to probably go back and take another look at the book,
Hmm.
because
Or you
what
just have a very niche book.
well that yes, absolutely,
You
but
know?
I
Yeah.
would say that's a audience misfit, right?
Yeah.
There's probably an audience for that on Amazon,
Yep.
but that audience is probably not reading on Royal Road, because again, the Royal Road audience is specific. I
Right.
posted my stories to Royal Road and to Wattpad, and believe me, two completely different. The comments I got were wildly different. On Wattpad, it was 100% about when are these people getting together, and
Right.
on on Royal Road, it was like, why aren't they killing more people? And
Right.
that was the two like extremes. And I was like, my story isn't about either of those things, so I don't know really what to do.
Well,
Um,
that's where, because Call Sign Bloodbath is technically a first person shooter slash
yeah,
assassin book. And that's
right,
where when I put it on Royal Road, I was like, I don't expect to get it very high, because
mhm,
look at every other book within the FPS genre on Royal
yeah,
Road. There's 12 of us.
yeah,
And I think 3 of the authors have like multiple books.
that's right. So
So
that,
that's where I'm
yeah,
like, I'm just expecting some type of feedback. I've
right,
got it, but I know Royal Road is not the platform where I'm going to get a huge audience, because it's
yeah,
just so different than what a first person shooter military assassin book is.
absolutely. And while there, I don't know of any platforms that are like military sci-fi specific.
Mhm.
Um, they can do well on Amazon. And that's,
Right.
that's a case where you have an audience on Amazon that doesn't exist on Royal Road, and so it's really hard to market test through the Royal Road path. Now, what it is good for is exactly what you used it for, right?
Mhm.
Getting some engagement and getting some feedback on the story itself.
Right. And it's funny too, because there's a certain scene in chapter 5, and I instantly see a cutoff of 50%, and I was like, "Yep, we're weeding out the weak ones right now," because book 2 gets so
Yep.
much worse.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and that's the other thing, is that, Royal Road readers are a particular kind of reader, and
mhm.
you have to understand what the demographic you're going for is. You
Right.
know, um, my books are pretty well tuned to my core audience, um, which has taken some years to do,
Mhm.
but because I know what my core audience is looking for, I'm confident in writing in multiple genres,
Right.
and I'm confident that they're going to still give it a chance, at
Yeah.
least.
Let's go to another question that Ryan had. So, what about the number of readers? Aren't there more people you could get to see your story on Amazon than Royal Road? I don't need the money, but aren't there more readers on Amazon?
100%. So the number of readers on Amazon is massive. The problem is with distribution. And what I mean by that is that Amazon is a platform that makes its money on eyeballs. When somebody sees a product and they click on the product and they buy the product, Amazon makes money. What Amazon shows to that person is going to be based on what they think that person is most likely to buy. and they determine that through a number of different metrics, like how many other people have bought this in the last 24 hours, what is the what's the review ratio, and what I mean by that is total number of reviews, total number of reviews versus written reviews, number of reviews in each country, how quickly after purchasing somebody reviews. There's all of these metrics that they're using to judge whether a product is a good fit for somebody. And here's
massive amount of data.
Yeah, and here's the problem. Amazon is not incentivized to show our books to anybody unless it thinks they will buy it. And so if you put a book on Amazon, it is entirely possible for it to literally be buried. Nobody will ever see it.
Yep.
And you can put as many links to it as you want, but there will be no organic traffic.
Right.
And the reality is that even for the best books that are out there, there is next to no organic traffic on Amazon. Unless somebody is specifically searching for your book, they're not going to find it unless you are running an ad specifically to target someone for your book. They're just not going to find it. And so discoverability on a place like Royal Road, which is free, is way easier because everything is tagged in categories and somebody can click into a category and can scroll through and be like, I read that, I read that, I read that, I read that, I read that. This is the next one. Let me give it a shot. Right. And so if you're smart with your positioning on Royal Road, even if nobody, like, even if you're not catching fire, even if you're not on Rising Stars, even if you're not on the front page, the system itself is set up so that people can discover you. That's not the case on Amazon. And so Amazon is just a harder place to generate audience. If you bring audience, if you bring your own audience, which is why these Royal Road guys are doing so well, you bring your own audience, it's killer. It's great.
I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is Amazon pretty much has saved reading and writing to a certain point with what they've allowed us to do as authors, especially for indies, where indies are killing it. What some people need to understand is when you're coming in and you're like, I'm an indie, I'm going to put my book and I'm going to be just like them. You're willing to throw down $1,000 a day of advertising,
right?
Because that is simple money for some indie authors. They are spending $1,000 a day. Many are spending more than that just on Amazon advertising to make sure they're ahead of you. And so I think some people need to have that reality of, you know, like you said, you're probably going to get buried unless you have a following already there to support you.
Yes. And you know, it's not hopeless. There are ways to mitigate. But what I would counsel people is, and actually this is the whole 20 books philosophy, right? Is books sell books. It's like you write more books. You don't expect success with the first book. You don't expect success with the second book. You probably don't even expect success with the first series.
Right.
You keep writing, and eventually, as you start building a loyal group of followers or fans or people who like your writing, they find your books and then they realize you have a back catalog and they start going through your back catalog, and that's how you make your money. It's not, you know, it's not about having a breakout hit.
Right.
That because it's so fickle. Like you can have the biggest book in the world, and then if nobody buys your second and nobody buys your third and nobody buys your fourth, you're going back to broke. Like that's just how it is. But on the other hand, if you can build a reputation for writing a better next book, and every single book that somebody reads is better, then that's worth everything. because people will read you forever. Like, as long as you put out a next book, they'll give it a chance. And you have to
Right.
keep doing it. You have to keep delivering. But I think one of the best compliments that I can get as an author is, this one was so much better than the last.
Right.
And as long as they say that every time, I'm gold.
Yeah. No, I think that's when I started The Dying Breed, I just thought one massive book. That's all. And then this. And I had to fight with Lucas, my development editor. I fought with him. I fought with a buddy, Todd Benson. I fought with my cousin, who's also published, where they're like, dude, make it a series, break it up. I was like, no, massive book. And I finally conceded. And that's when I, exploded
Mhm.
my head with 13 books, at least of an idea,
Right.
to where I started to realize you can go this way. And so I think it's one of those things, again, like, do you want to write as a hobby and just have fun and just put it out there? Or if you're wanting to take this seriously, this is your second job for the next couple of years while
Yes.
you polish your craft. So, can you kind of take us through? You started writing in 2015.
Hmm.
As you started to develop, as you started to grow, where were some of those key moments where you had to take the next step? And that's when you finally got to that point of realizing, I am ready for this next new career.
Sure. So, 2000, beginning of 2018 was when I was starting to write what became the Titan series, Novaterra. And it was 15 chapters, and it was sort of a throwaway story. And that's when I got that comment that was like, hey, there's a story in here that I'd really like to read. And I was like, cool. So this is it. I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn it into a book. And that year, I wrote the first book based on those 15 chapters. I just expanded them out into a book, 100,000 words, and or just shy of 100,000. And at the same time, I started trying to figure out the model that I wanted to use.
Mm.
And that took a lot of work, and it took a lot of effort, and um, sort of venturing into the unknown, because the reality
Can you
was,
kind of explain what you mean when you say model? I think I know exactly what you're referring to, but I don't think
sure.
some readers really understand what that means.
Yeah, so every author has a model that they use for the business side of what they're doing. And for most authors, the model is, I write a book, I give it to, if I'm traditionally published, I give it to my agent who sells it to a publisher who handles everything. If you're on the indie side, it's, I write my book, I get my editing done, like I organize my editing. Once I have it done, I get a cover, I take it to Amazon. If I'm going exclusive, I publish through KU and KDP. If I'm going
Mhm.
wide, I publish through Ingram Spark, blah, 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 all those things. There's another model that is the Royal Road to Patreon to Amazon route, right? And that is, I publish a story for free, posting content daily or weekly on Royal Road, Wattpad, Scribble Hub, something like that. I then funnel all of those people to Patreon. From Patreon, I wait until I have enough material for a completed book, and then I take that completed book and I put it on Amazon and I sell it that way. And for most people, that's like, they fall into one of those three different models, either the traditional model, the indie model, or the
Like a hybrid almost.
the web serial model
Yeah.
is what it's called, because that's what web serialists do. And because I come from the web serial world, that's the model I was like, okay, I think this is going to give me the most success.
Right.
Plus, I also recognize something. And this is something, again, the more you can push back your gratification, the longer
Mhm.
your time horizon can be, the higher the reward. And so my thought was, if I can just give away my story for free to literally anybody who will read it, eventually they're going to want to read more of it. And eventually I can start charging them for it. And so that's what I
Right.
did. And I just gave away a lot of that content for free. So when I talk about model, that's what I'm talking about, is the refined process that I use to take my stories from my head to my readers' hands. And I had been studying all of these different kinds of models, for a little while, just out of curiosity because I like business stuff, and ended up using this model. The biggest sort of inflection point then was just pulling the trigger, was just being willing to like put my things out into the world, right? To say, hey, I'm going to make this a reality. I'm going to try to do this. For the first, so that was end of 2018, December of 2018, book one came out, and I continued to write and continued to work for the next 2 years. Now, through 2019, another sort of big, important moment in my budding career happened. And that was that I went to 20 books to 50K. And I actually got a scholarship for it because I couldn't
Nice.
afford to do it. And I
Yep.
couldn't afford it. And so I wrote them an email, and it was probably the weirdest email that they had ever gotten, to apply for this scholarship, because they asked the question, like, tell us what it would mean to you to
Mm.
become successful in this.
Oh, okay.
And I wrote back and I said, I don't honestly know how to answer this question because I am going to be successful in this.
Yeah.
Like, it is an absolute certainty. It is not a matter of whether I'm going to do this. It's simply a matter of when. And so I am already operating in this mindset. And they gave me the scholarship. I don't know why. I don't know
You know,
why,
I
but
got a
they
scholarship
gave
for this year, so that's how I'm going. So I totally
yeah, I love
understand.
it. I love it, man. I love it. And well, and so in fact, maybe you got mine, because every year since then, I've, in addition to buying my own ticket, I've bought another ticket
You know
for
what?
their
I'll just claim
scholarship.
it. I'll be like, yep,
Yeah,
this is Seth's. I get to keep
yeah,
it.
for the scholarship program, because it
Yeah.
really, really was so instrumental in my own life. And um, probably not in the way that most people think, though. I got there, and what I learned after a week of listening to all of the panels and the lectures and like all of the different pieces was that I needed to ignore 90% of the advice that I was hearing because it simply didn't apply to me. And
Yep.
I don't mean that in a way, in like a self-aggrandizing way. I mean that in
Right.
a, I was on a specific path and there are a million paths. And so 90% of the advice was for someone else on a different path. It
Yep.
just wasn't for me. And so learning how to sift through that information, that is what took my career from, this is something that I am doing and trying to build up, to, no, this is really working,
Yeah.
right? It was head down, grind it out,
Yep.
doing the specific actions that I know work, that I know are going to, get me where I want to go, and just doing them over and over and over and over and over again. And so
Yeah.
that was sort of the second major point. The first one, again, actually publishing, finishing a book, getting it out, like putting myself out there and doing the thing. The second
Yep.
one, understanding what my path was and how to stay true to it. And then the third was really when I finished the Titan series. And I went full time before that.
Okay.
Um, but I went full time knowing sort of what I could do, right? So up until that point, I'd been
Well,
writing
when
4
you
books
say
a year.
knowing what you can do, I mean, that's a business sense of like, test and analysis, like how much load can we
Correct.
carry? How much? So you really are
100%.
looking at yourself behind the scenes of like, okay, can we sustain this model now?
Yes, 100%. And so what I discovered was I was writing 4 books, uh, 3 to 4 books a year. And
Mhm.
I thought to myself, I'm writing 3 to 4 books a year with 2 hours in the morning, an hour sometimes at lunch, and an hour if I feel like it in the evenings.
Yep.
And I'm just very consistent with my mornings. So if I could just double that, if I could just write for 6 hours a day instead of 3 hours a day, I could just double the amount of books I'm producing. and I
Yep.
understand my model, and I understand approximately how much I earn with each book. And if I double that, then I can replace my income from uh, as a sales manager, and I'll get all of this extra free time, right?
Yeah.
That I can potentially grow things even more. And I told that to my wife. I like explained it all to her, and she was like, "You're insane. Like, there's no way. This
Well,
is
that's
not going to
where
work."
I don't know if you've ever listened to the Stacking Benjamins podcast. I love those guys, but they say, someone is always normally the CEO of the family and
Yeah,
someone is always the CFO, the chief
that's right.
financial officer. And
That's right.
sometimes they do not see eye to eye.
Nope.
So that's what I'm imagining you and your
Yeah,
wife of like, okay, here's the idea.
very much.
What?
Very much. But we got to the point where financially it was like, okay, we can take the bet, because
Mm,
it's a risk. It's always a risk. You never know if it's
right.
actually going to work. You never know if it's going to succeed. And as much, one thing I always try to remind myself, again, aggressive humility. Past success is not a guarantee of future success. Um, and just because I've had books that have done well doesn't mean that my next series is going to hit.
Yep.
You know, it might just be the market. It hits the market at the wrong time. People just aren't interested in that. The zeitgeist changes. Like there's a million reasons why it may just not connect with people. And
Yep.
so I'm not very risk averse. Like I'm highly risk
Mm,
tolerant. But I try to always temper what I'm like the move I'm making with
right.
that understanding. But I was still pretty convinced that on the low end, by doubling my output, I could increase my income to the point where I could like quit my job and write full time. And so I did, and it worked. Uh, and because I'm a little bit obsessed with process and like optimization, I have since increased the number of books that I'm writing. I think I did 10 last year, and I'm planning on hitting 15 to 16 this year, depending on how the next few months pan out. Um, and and then next year, I'm going back down because I don't like it. It's too many.
So
It's too many. But
let's,
the point is that like
oh, okay.
that my that all of this, like as much as writing and being an author is a creative thing, and it is a
Mhm.
highly creative thing, there are ways to like there are models you can use to create sustainability in it. You don't have to be a starving artist. You don't
Right.
have to be the, crazy writer. You can just do this as a job and really enjoy it and make it sustainable and make it very rewarding.
So going back to when you were getting up in the morning,
Mhm.
what was that alarm clock set to?
Uh, 4:45, 5 o'clock.
So that's where, because I think, coming from a military background where fitness was one of the biggest things pounded
Mhm.
into us, mission readiness, be ready to move. I really had to tell my troops who were struggling with that, I was like, how bad do you want this? And as I've transitioned into writing and doing more author stuff, it's how bad do you want this?
That's
And
100% it.
before I quit my job and
Mhm.
started writing full time for a short period of time, the alarm clock was going off at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
and I was getting up for those 2 hours just like you. And then
Yeah.
normally an hour to 2 hours at night after my workout and after I got done with work. So it's like, how bad do I want this? I want this really bad. And so you
Yeah.
have to dedicate if you want to go down that path.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, oh,
I
go ahead.
think I think that's, that's the thing that separates the chaff from the wheat, right? The goats from the sheep. It's like at the end of the day, we all have great ideas. At the end of the day, we all have these amazing worlds and stories inside of us. Human creativity is endless, and anybody can learn to tap into it. The thing that separates the successful author from the daydreamer is the willingness to do the work at the keyboard, right?
Yep.
Spend the time with the butt in the chair doing the work.
Yeah. I think what's funny is I've had a few people who laugh when I say I buy a new keyboard for every book. So I have not upgraded my keyboard yet. It's in a box over to the side. And it's something like I love to do and collect. And eventually, like years down the road, I want to take off each key and like have some custom art and be able to give that to super fans, whatever.
That would be really
But
cool.
it's like even with one book on this keyboard, the E is already sticking to where I'll get
Yeah.
2 E's instead of one. So I'm like,
Yeah.
yo, you literally are bashing your way through keyboards.
That's right. That's right. And but that's, that's the evidence of the commitment. And I think that's really cool. I think that's really cool.
So you mentioned this. You actually mentioned this to me in Vegas too. And then another author who I'm hoping to have on to this stream later this year talked about this with me at DragonCon. And what was great was, this author, from a success standpoint, from just financial numbers, they're way outperforming me. And yet they looked at me and said, do you have this stress or pressure? And I was like, wow, like this is a great time. The stress and pressure when you're going from one book series to another.
Oh my goodness.
And especially when you're full-time author. Now, a totally separate conversation at DragonCon, totally different author who said, dude, I spent 6 months writing this book series and it hasn't hit.
Yeah.
It hasn't hit like my other work. And
Right.
that is hard when you're
hard.
doing full-time author, you're kind of planning out from those numbers, those projections.
That's right.
And then you spend 6 months, a half year, hoping to get those numbers. It doesn't hit. Do you mind talking about what it was, that stress and pressure, like when you went from Nova Terra to Battle Mage Farmer, and now you're about to drop a whole new book?
Yeah, I am.
How has that developed
man.
in everything?
So it's really, there's a lot of pressure because our income is directly tied to the performance of these books. And so any adjustment down has the potential to become a precipitous drop. And the reason for that is because a book it's not just how well it sells right out of the gate. It's how well does it sell over time, right? Because our income is largely determined by our back catalog. It's largely determined about how long our tail is. Because if somebody buys the first book in the Nova Terra series, and I know the read through on that is good, and they're going to get through 10 plus books in that series, right? And so somebody buys the first one, I know there's a high likelihood chance that they're going to read all the way through, as long as they finish the first book. But if I have a series that comes out and it doesn't perform well, I got a problem. I have a real problem, because let's say I have 3 series out and the first one does well and the second one does well and the third one does not. If somebody reads the first one and then the second one, they're probably never going to, if somebody reads the first one and the third one, right, they're never going to pick up the second one.
Right.
Because
the second one must be like this third one if this is what
exactly, right? And because you only really have one chance for somebody's trust, and it's the book they're currently reading. And if they read it and they don't like it for whatever reason, there's just going to be that mental resistance to buying any more of your work.
Yeah.
Okay. This is why that concept of write a better next book, like the book you're writing, you can never phone it in. You have to write the best book you can possibly write. But at the end of the day, it's stressful because it's a gamble. Like there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee of success. You can be the greatest writer of all time and you write a book and people are like, "Meh, it didn't do it for me." Right? Like that's common. That's common. And so at the same time, there are ways to mitigate. And so I know I've talked a lot about this on the stream, but the model that I use is specifically designed to combat that problem. And so I have, and it may be a little bit long to go into for this stream.
Well, the record's 3.5 hours, so it's as long as
All
your
right.
wife will let
Hey,
us hang out.
cool, awesome. Then I'm in. So I literally just put out a YouTube video that talks about the model I use, and there's a cheat sheet that literally breaks it down, a PDF. But basically, I use a funnel that is reversible. So I have Royal Road to Patreon, Patreon to Discord. Okay, Discord to a beta reader group, and then I feed content into my beta reader group. Double check it. I then feed it into some of my Discord users, double check it. I then feed it into my Patreon, double check it, and then I feed it to Royal Road to double check it. I guess quadruple check it by that point. The point is that I have market tested all of my books before they go out. Before they ever hit Amazon, I know approximately how it's going to do. I know who in my core audience is going to love it. I know if it's a perfect fit for my core audience or a peripheral fit for my core audience. I understand approximately how well it's going to do. And so I know also then how much marketing I have to put behind it in order to keep it in range of where my books need to be.
Right.
And so this process that I've sort of stumbled into over time, and honestly stolen from other people. Like I've just, like, any good idea I find, I'm just like, yeah, great. Give that.
It's so American. Like, oh, that's great. Let me take this.
Absolutely.
I'm going to make it mine.
Absolutely. But this is also the reason that I always try to explain it to anybody who will listen. And I try to share it with anybody who wants it, because like for free. I don't, I'm never planning on monetizing it, because I've gotten it for free. Other people should get it for free too. Right. I've benefited hugely from the various author groups I've been in. So like, I'm in. Let's, what does 20 books say? Rising tide lifts all boats or ships or something like that. Yep. But because I use this model, I find that I don't have to stress overly much. I know how my books are going to do.
Nice. So. Let's go back to some of the comments that Ryan has asked us. So, is just wanting praise for your story wrong? I feel like that's all I want at the end of the day.
Oh, man. I am of two minds of that. I would say that wanting praise for a bad story is wrong. But I also think that wanting praise for what you're doing well is totally legitimate. And if you have a good story, people will recognize it. But I think that looking for validation through your story is never going to be the experience you want it to be. And I say that as someone who spent most of his early life looking for validation from other people. It might feel great in the moment, but at the end of the day, you are still going to see everything that's wrong with your story. You're still going to understand it. You're still going to be the person who's like, man, it's not what I want it to be. Now, at the same time, just being able to give somebody something fun or something that makes them feel, and getting that feedback from them that, yeah, it did exactly what you were trying to make it do. Like, that's great. And I think that's totally legitimate. It's totally legitimate to want that kind of feedback.
Right. I think it's
to write that story.
The praise is just wanting praise for your story wrong. I think you really hit it on the head. I think this is why I love talking to you, because we're so similar mindset. There's times where when I wrote certain things in the Die and Breed, I was like, oh yeah, it's going to hit here. And then when I got feedback, they were like, oh, it hit over here, here, and here. And we love
Right.
this. And it's like, I didn't intend for that.
Right.
So it can really throw you. But at the same time, I feel like you're kind of right where why am I wanting praise for a story? Is it validating something else deeper within myself?
Mhm.
At the end of the day, a story is just a story.
That's right.
Did you have fun with it? If you had fun
And
with it, great. Because I think when you're starting out, if you come from the whole belief of if this does not go anywhere else and it gets buried in Amazon and no one else ever reads it, I can still be content with what I
Mhm.
did.
Yeah. I think that's a really important, that's a very mature, like, mindset for it. And I also think that writing man, I feel like a broken record. Writing a better next story requires you being willing to take the praise and the criticism and hold them both lightly.
Yeah,
To
it's
be
very
able to
true.
say, I'm separate from this. This is not like, the reality is that every single one of you who wants to write or is writing has better stories in you. The stories you're
Mhm.
telling right now are not your best stories. There
Yeah.
are better stories there. And so keep going, like, keep writing, and no matter what anybody says, and get to those better stories. Like, the most precious stones are the deepest, right? Like, that's the way it is.
You may get so emotionally attached to that first story because like this is a story you've dreamt about for 13 plus years and you've
Yeah.
these characters that you have grown up to, but at the end of the day, and I told this I think to someone else where I said you could have the greatest authors in the world be your coaches.
Mhm.
You could have New York Times bestsellers, award winners, all these things, and at the end of the day the readers may not like it.
Right.
At the end of the day, the readers may not want it. So when you have this emotional attachment to that first series,
It's
oh, this
hard.
is the hey, guess what? Let it go
That's right.
because the next one, like you said, the next one in you is going to be better, hopefully.
Yeah. You know,
Um,
I've often heard experienced authors say that the best thing you can do is write your first story, stick it in a cupboard somewhere, and never look at it again. And then write your second story
right.
and take that one to market, right?
Yeah.
Because even the act of writing a story is just going to teach you so much.
Yep.
It's going to teach you how to construct sentences for writing a novel, which weirdly is like totally different than, like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird.
Well,
It's weird.
again, like when I started, I had no idea what third person, first person, past
Right.
tense, present tense.
Right.
I did not know those things, but now I've learned a
Yeah.
lot.
Oh
So,
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Ryan, does that mean if the book doesn't do well, granted, some of these questions are from previous,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, back to the coal mine for you, or do you try again?
I say always try again.
Yep.
Now my recommendation is that you work in the coal mine while you're writing. Um, if nothing else, it will provide uh, a muse of sorts. But I'm also very much a believer that writing is just a skill. It's the same as swinging a pickaxe. You
Yep.
swing a pickaxe long enough, you learn how to swing a pickaxe, right? You learn where to hit, you learn how to not bruise your hands, you learn how to do it all day long. Writing is like that. It's just a skill you learn. It's a type of storytelling. Just like if you want to get good at telling stories to people, um, you have to you have to do it. Like, you
Yep.
have to speak. You have to find people, you have to find stories, you have to, like, put those two things together, and you have to practice. It's like playing an instrument. You want to be a virtuoso piano player? Great. Start practicing.
Yep.
And that's every skill in life. So Robert Greene has this book called Mastery, where he goes through geniuses, like a study of genius, and breaks it down. And he talks about the way that masters of their craft
Crafts. Yeah.
are created. And what's fascinating is that all of them just had a very specific way of practicing and iterating and getting better. And it was this idea of just do the next one better, just do the next one better, just do the next
Yep.
one better. And practice, 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 and then keep practicing. And then
Yep.
when you're tired of it, practice some more. Right.
Yep.
So I think that no, it's not back to the coal mine with you, in that maybe you're still working in the coal mine, but you can keep writing. You can keep doing
Mhm.
it. You can there's no reason to ever give up. Like, there's literally no reason to stop writing.
Mhm.
Because even
If
if
this
you
is what you want to
yeah,
do,
if it's what you want to do,
do
do
it.
it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I didn't take my laptop to DragonCon with me for a reason, and yet I knew Michael Stackpole was doing some writing and editing in the mornings. Ryan DeBrune was doing some
Yep.
editing. Like, some of the guys were bringing their stuff. They're still working. For me, it was one of the first nights we were there. I go outside. I think it just started raining. One of those nights. So I have my umbrella. I'm smoking one of my cigars, and the song Gotham City by R. Kelly comes on. And in that moment, I was inspired. I wrote over 1,000 words on my phone,
Right.
just in Google Docs, because I'm like, yo, I love this idea. I love this setting. I'm
There you
gonna
go.
write there. So if you want to write, you got to do it. And one of the things I've talked about on my updates before, which is so critical, there's only one way to gain confidence, and that is doing.
Yep.
You can study any skill as much as you want, read all the books, watch all the YouTube. You will not grow your confidence until you actually do the deed, until you actually do the act. Okay, so Ryan, it really feels like this is something that isn't for everyone. Truly respect you for taking this risk, as it's something I really don't know I'd be able to take a leap for.
Oh man. Well, first of all, thank you. Those are very kind words. What I would like to say is that what we were just talking about, TJ, what you just said, that the only way to gain confidence is by doing. That's it. I did not move into this confidently. I was nervous out of my mind before I published my first book. I was convinced that, like everything else I had touched in my entire life, this whole thing was just going to crash and burn. One of the things I didn't talk about, that I'll bring up now very briefly, is that every skill that I tried to learn before I taught myself how to program, I failed to learn. Like, I just failed. I could do one thing, and that was I could read, and I could absorb information very quickly. But I failed at practically every instrument I ever tried. I tried to learn French for 8 years and couldn't speak it at all. I tried to learn Spanish for multiple years, couldn't speak it at all. I tried all sorts of skill acquisition.
Which is kind of unique given your parents' background.
It is, yeah, yeah. Yes, it was a sticking point, for sure. But I tried all sorts of things, and I tried to learn all of these different skills, and I failed at all of them. And I taught myself how to program out of desperation, right? And I taught myself how to program by just not giving up at all, ever. And I was still a bad programmer.
Yeah.
In the same way that I think I'm still not the greatest writer. But the point is that, like, no, the only way to build confidence, again, I'm just echoing what you said. The only way to build confidence is to stack a record of success doing the thing that just obliterates any sort of self-doubt, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Sure, it can be risky to become an author. It can be risky to sort of step out and take that leap of moving away from a secure full-time job and moving into, sort of the unknown of it. But the reality is that, like, it's accessible to anybody. As
Mhm.
long as you're willing to put in the work, as long as you're willing to take the steps to exert the effort,
Mm.
you can get there.
Yeah. I remember one of the very first videos you were posting when you started your YouTube channel, which we are going to talk about because you have an awesome YouTube channel.
Oh, thank you. That's kind of you.
You talked about, it was like one of like the top 5 or top 10 things, and one of them on there was how awkward it is when you tell someone I'm an author. And what I found in myself when I first started out, it was awkward. Oh yeah, I'm an author. Am I an author? I'm indie.
Right?
Yeah, no, I'm an author, right?
Right?
And now today, I mean, let's see. So 3 and Dying Breed, so 6 books.
Right.
I don't necessarily have the awkwardness because I'm like, yo, even if you don't like my story, I know
Right.
I'm a good story writer.
Yeah.
I've gotten to that point of confidence of being like, yeah, no, I'm an author. Oh, have I read your work? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But, and I think one of the bigger things that has really helped me is when you see your skills progress.
Yes.
And when you can analyze your stuff, you get this confidence within yourself, not just the writing, because you're like, wow, look at how much I've learned.
Mm-hmm.
Look at how much I've learned about myself, about not giving up on this process. And still, even if I only sell 100 copies, I still finish that product.
That's right.
So yeah, so I think that's a huge thing for people. Once you get to that point of just not giving up,
mm-hmm.
and at least being proud of saying, yeah, here you go. This is mine.
So. Yeah, it took me almost a full year after I was full-time to be able to admit to people without feeling awkward that I was a full-time author.
Yeah.
And what I found that was helpful for me is adding full-time or published to it. Right? Because it was just a little reminder for me at the beginning of the conversation that no, I did the thing.
Yeah.
I did it. And it's not a matter of like, do they believe it or not? It's just reality that I did the thing.
Yeah. I can hand you a physical copy.
Right.
Like, do you not?
Yeah.
What's funny is I've had 1 or 2 people who are like, oh, so you're full-time? I'm like, yes, I am not making money, but I am full-time. Like, there are 2 differences here. I was able to put enough money to the side to allow me to do this for a certain period of time. So, okay. So let's transition. You want to talk about Dreamer's Throne or your YouTube next? What would you like to talk about?
Either one is totally...
Okay. Let's go to Dreamer's Throne first.
Sure.
So
I wrote a book.
Yeah, you do. What is that? What we're doing here? Hopefully this. Let's see. Okay. Yep. So,
dude, that's fancy. That's fancy.
First off, I love this cover, man.
Oh, thank you.
This is so. What's funny is Disney just came out with Haunted Mansion, the movie.
Yeah, right.
And as soon as I saw your cover, I'm like, that's instantly what I'm getting.
I'm really hoping the timing on that is like helpful for me.
Yeah.
So it's so Dreamer's Throne is a sort of eldritch fantasy about a guy who wakes up in the body of a young nobleman who is paralyzed from the waist down and is missing an arm, or his arm has been chopped off.
I noticed that. So what's funny is I saw the cover and I noticed that, and then when I read the blurb, I was like, oh, okay,
yep. And he is trying to keep himself from being thrown out in the street by a mob boss who owns the inn where he's been dragged after being rescued from the river. And he's trying to avoid that fate while also trying to defend himself against nightmares who are invading from a dream world that's sort of overlaid on top of everything. This is my
Okay.
first foray into writing horror. And it actually was not originally going to be a horror novel. And then I had what was probably in the top 10 weirdest experiences of my life. And given my
Oh,
life, I've had a lot of weird experiences. But it was sort of bizarre, but it gave me the perfect inspiration for like the feeling that I wanted people to have. And man, this book just like flew out of me once I had that.
can we
Uh,
talk about this? Like, I really
yeah,
want this
sure.
behind
So
the scenes.
it was again, it was so weird. But to set the context, my family has my parents live up north from where I live in Pennsylvania, and there are mountains that are covered in forests. Okay.
Yeah.
And they're all old forests. So, like tall trees, not a lot of branches low down, right? You can
Yep.
see through the forest. Clear floors, not a lot of vegetation down low. And we were driving along one of these back windy roads, and it's hard to explain exactly, but I come around the corner and there's a guy there, and our eyes lock instantly as I'm driving in a car, and he's got this weird scowl on his face, and his eyes are huge and bugged out, and he is crouched at the side of the road, half behind a branch, staring directly at me over the branch. Okay. He's dressed in all black. I'm telling you, weirdest thing ever. He's dressed in all black and he's just staring at me, right? And our eyes, like I'm coming around the corner and down the road sort of towards him, and then I bend and turn away, and our eyes remained locked the entire time. It was so bizarre. And so that was just like, all right, that was weird, right? And then that night, I'm back staying at the cabin where we were staying while we were visiting my parents. Okay. This cabin doesn't have indoor showers, it has outdoor showers that are open to the woods. And so I'm out there taking my shower, and this thought, you ever have one of those thoughts where you're like halfway through it and you're like, I better stop thinking this thought right
Yep.
now, otherwise I'm in trouble?
Yep.
Unfortunately, I couldn't stop it. And it was, what if that guy was just behind me, behind one of these trees, staring at me again?
Seth,
And he
it's great to
wasn't,
see you again.
right? And he wasn't. And I turned around and I looked, but the feeling in my heart for like every time I went to open a door or look at the window, I was like, what if he's there staring at me? And I just couldn't shake it, right? And that feeling, when I got back from that trip and I sat down to start writing Dreamer's Throne, I was like, that's it. That's the essence of that feeling. I want somebody who's experiencing the world to be like, uh-oh, like what's watching, like what's right outside the door, whose eye is just staring at me from the darkness. So anyway, that's
So, did you already have Dreamer's Throne concepted? Like really, okay, come on, this is what I
no,
want to do. And then that experience happened, so you tailored it, or was it literally from that
no.
experience?
It was literally from that experience I started writing, and I had intended for the
Nope, we're staying.
I had intended for the series to be more like power fantasy adventure. And then I had that experience, and then I sat down to write, and I started writing Garrett, and I was like, all right, he wakes up and he's been robbed, but that's not bad enough. So
Right.
he's missing an arm. That doesn't feel bad enough either. So he's paralyzed from the waist down because of a sword wound.
Okay.
And I fully intended when I originally came up with that concept, because of the power system that I use,
Mhm.
again, it's lit RPG, for him to like heal his way out of it. And then as I started
Mm.
writing, I was like, wait a second, I have this really cool opportunity to write a character that is drastically different than any of my other characters. If anybody who reads my books is going to be familiar, that I typically write a specific brand of just like punch first, ask questions later type of character, right?
Oops.
Who is physically very imposing.
Right.
And I was like, what if I just wrote a character who couldn't be? What if I just took that away from myself? What would happen? And so I did. And so he is not physically imposing. He is not, he cannot intimidate people in that way. But it's been an absolute delight to write. And I just finished the third book in the series.
Jeez.
So it's been an absolute delight to write this character who is brains over brawn. He is very much a schemer because he has to be a schemer, right? He doesn't
Right.
have another option. Um, it's been so fun.
What's funny too is this book publishes in 5 days,
Mm-hmm.
September 19th, and you're
Mm-hmm.
already done with book 3. So I think that's where with some people it's like, oh, their new book just dropped. Some authors do not, publish the book right away. They have more stories to come.
That's right.
But one of my favorite phrases you have shared in your YouTube videos is, and I might butcher it, I apologize, your world can only be as smart as the author, and vice versa. The author can
That's
only
right.
be as smart as the world. You're writing this at the same time. Do you think you could have written this story at the very beginning when you started writing, or was
There's
it?
no way.
That's what I was wondering.
There's no way. The just on from a technical perspective
Mm-hmm.
alone, that is like, I've grown so much as a writer that there's no way. My plots have become more intricate. My understanding of characters, my understanding of motivation, my understanding of tension in a story has changed. One of the things that people often comment as they read my earlier work is how sort of meandering it is, not in a bad way, in a fun, lighthearted adventure way.
Gotcha.
This is not a fun, lighthearted adventure. It is fun. It's just not lighthearted. There are scenes that people read and go, ooh, right? Which is very different from everything else I've written. It's very different and so I'm curious to see, well, again, I say I'm curious to see how it's going to do. I
Right.
know approximately how it's going to do because I've already tested it. So
Yeah.
my core audience has read it. I understand this. It's for some of them, not for others. But I understand where it sits, sort of.
Nice.
But no, I absolutely could not have. Right. This is one of those better books. And
Yeah.
and it took me writing 17 other books to get to this point where I can write it.
And that's where I know for myself, granted, the Dying Breed books 1 through 4 are omniscient narrator and third person, because I had no idea what I'm doing. Call Sign Bloodbath is first person.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm so excited to get to book 5 of the Dying Breed, but it's like, hey, I'm going into first person, do a little author's note of why the switch, but it's focused, and it's one of those things of like, yes, I want to take all this skill and knowledge and
That's
pour
exactly
it into
right.
this next book. So
yeah, I love that. I love that. I think,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's good. Dude, I'm
Always write a
super
better.
excited. So Dreamer's Throne, you guys, is coming out September 19th.
Hmm.
What other books are in the works? Are you allowed to tell us, like,
Yeah,
obviously you
sure.
just gave us the spoiler that you finished book 3 of this series. So what else are
Yep.
you working on?
So I have Battle Mage Farmer 7, 8, and 9 to write. I have the Tower series books, who knows how many. I'm starting book 5 now. Written the first couple chapters, and we're getting into that. Um, Dreamer's Throne, I will probably continue. Um, Pretty sure people will find me and murder me if I don't,
Okay.
because where book 3 ends, everybody is like, hurry up. Like, let's, like, all my patrons are like, okay, let's go. Let's,
Yeah.
like, keep this going.
These others are
Um,
nice. That's great. But
right. No, but keep this one going. So that's good. That's good. But next year, I have a new series called, by the title of Soul Caller, coming out.
Ooh.
Book 1, I think, is coming out in March. And that is sort of a quasi-Western fantasy from the point of view of a native of this
Oh,
world.
yes.
And
I love
so,
that.
without really any spoilers, there are natives on this planet, and there are cowboys and aliens both invading in order to strip the um, minerals, or
Resources.
the resources, mana stones from this planet. And this kid has to, who's a native of the world, has to sort of figure out, and is sort of based on a First Nation, Native American
Mm.
sort of concept, but is half or it's like taking a mix between an orc and an elf.
Ooh,
uh,
okay.
yeah. And anyway, so that one's coming out. That one's really fun. I'm reaching back to my Western roots. Like I said, I read a lot of Louis L'Amour when I was young, Zane Grey. Um, so I'm
And is
reaching
this a
back
lit
to that.
RPG as well?
That is lit RPG, yeah. But then I'm also working on a standalone utopian thriller that I'm going to probably not self-publish. I'll probably try to find an agent for it and take it through the traditional route, mostly because I'm
Nice.
just really curious about what that is. Like, what is all, like, goes into that. So I'm
Yeah.
interested in learning about the business from that side as well. So that's in progress. And then I think I can announce this. If I can't, sorry, but I I just signed a new series with Aethon for next year, um, by the name. I think I'm going to call it Iron Tyrant, and it's
Well, that's at
going.
least your working title.
Yes, it is my working title, and that's going to be about uh, a Solomon, or someone who summons and makes contracts with devils, who's
Oh, yeah.
clawing his way up through a brutal, like, military regime, while trying to fend off the high level devils who are coming after his soul. So that's going to be
Nice.
a fun one.
Dude, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, and then the thing I'm most excited about, and sorry for this, I've been telling everybody, I'm going to write a fantasy Regency romance series that is not lit RPG.
nice.
That's about the look that I get from everybody when I say that. But I'm going to venture out into sort of new territory, and because I love Regency romances, I love romance in general,
Mhm.
and so I'm going to try my hand at it. We'll see.
So, here's the thing is, so I read Jenna M. George's A Break in the Trees, and I've mentioned her before in my videos. Young adult thriller suspense. I would have never picked that book up.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely loved it.
Yep.
Absolutely loved it. I have my own steamy romance where I met the indie author. And she's like, "Oh, it's like a 3 to 5 spice level depending on your
Yeah.
forte." But as a writer, I wanted to, like, look at how did you build this story?
Correct.
Because I moved from scene to scene. Some of these things she built it from an emotional level of like, here's guilt, here's self-confidence, here's this. So
Right.
it's like, how do I take all of these different skill sets and apply them? So
Yeah.
it's like, hey, when you're at this point in your career, you know what? I'm going to have fun. I'm going to challenge
Right.
myself. I'm going to do this. So
That's
freaking
sort of
go
what
for it, man.
that's what I'm trying, to try to develop again, it's like we were talking about earlier, the only way you develop skills is practice. If I
Yeah.
write the same thing over and over and over again, not only will I get tired, but my readers are going to get tired. I might get
Yep.
really, really good at delivering that specific thing, but eventually it's going to get stale. But
Yeah.
if I can start practicing other skills, other
Hmm.
types of writing, other plot structures, other ways of telling stories, and I can start incorporating them into my own writing style, eventually my thought is, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but my thought is that I'll eventually hit on a style that is uniquely mine, that
Yeah.
is that people like, but that my readers enjoy. And once I get there, then I can just write whatever in that style and
Yep.
I'll be good.
I think as the more I write, the harder it is for me to read.
Yes.
And like, I know you and I, we both love Atomic Habits.
Mhm.
I am a huge component for Dr. Henry Cloud's Necessary Endings. I know I've sent you one or two books. That Discipline is Your Destiny,
Mhm.
Ego is the Enemy.
I
I
love it.
love those books. And so that's where I'm like, you know what? My next book is going to be that. That's where I love to saturate myself with mentally.
Mhm.
But when I'm reading other authors within the space, I it's almost hard for me to just enjoy it because it's like I've already developed my voice.
That's right.
And so for me to read someone else's voice, I'm like, I probably would have done this or that.
Yeah, or you're like, "Okay, interesting choice, to have this scene follow that scene," and
Right.
or it's all right, they're clearly setting up something here, and I think I can see what the payoff is. Yep, there it is. Okay, wasn't surprised. Like, it's just a different way of reading, you know?
Yeah.
It's like giving an aircraft mechanic a manual, right? Their method of read like, if I read that manual, I'd be like, "I don't know what any of this is." Like, I can understand generally what it's telling me, but I don't
Hmm.
understand it, right?
Right.
But a mechanic who reads it is going to be like, "Yeah, I get this. Like, I understand the intricacies of it," right?
Hmm.
And so, yeah, just not like the way other people pace is different than the way I pace,
Yep.
and then I'm reading through and I'm like, "This is bugging me because it's either taking too long or they're skipping too fast," or like, you know, it's it is hard. It is hard.
Yeah. There's times where I've read like Brian Norton's Quest Academy Silvers,
Mhm.
fell in love with it. And it's not just because he put me in it as a character. Which
I'm
is,
sure that
it's
helps.
really creepy, the story behind like some of that. But it was so beautifully written. And so when I do read certain books, I almost have to do like market research from other people who have read a lot of work to where
Mhm.
it's like I am looking to grow my skill and understanding of this particular facet of writing.
Yes.
Therefore, what book do I need to read next, which is going to help me comprehend that particular skill set? It's
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
So I actually have a stack of probably 15 books on my desk downstairs from recommendations that I got at Dragon Con for
Oh, nice.
books for specific things, right? Because again, I'm looking to refine my skill set in specific ways. And so people were saying, "Oh, this is a good example of this specific thing," right? But the reality is that I don't expect to finish most of them. I expect to
Hmm.
read far enough into them to figure out what it is they're doing and how they're doing it, and then
Right.
to be like, "Okay, cool, on to the next one."
Yeah.
And this is actually a great transition into YouTube because I'm also planning on recording myself and then reacting to a lot of these books
Oh,
as
okay.
an author.
Interesting.
Just saying, "Hey, as an author, this is how I read now, and let me talk to you about what I think. And also halfway through, I'm going to stop, pause, and make my predictions and see if I'm right or not, Anyway,
Right.
so I'll be putting some content together. But yeah, I'll be putting it up on my YouTube, Seth Ring Writes.
Yep. So for
YouTube
those of
channel.
you who are tuning in, all of Seth's links that I could find, he has a lot, but the vast majority of them are in the video description. So his YouTube website, I think I got your Instagram. I know I got your Twitter, your Amazon
Sweet.
author stuff. A lot of his links are all there in the video description. But yeah, for your YouTube channel, dude, you've got some incredible content. So for
Thank
those
you.
people who are aspiring authors, curious readers to get into the mindset of a writer, author, man, you've been crushing it with some of your videos. So go ahead and talk to us about this evolution.
Sure. So I realized I realized at the end of last year and it was actually about this time last year, I was like, I should start experimenting with YouTube because I don't have a great way to engage directly with my readers and just sort of put thoughts out that isn't temporal. And what I mean by that is like, I don't have a blog, I don't have anything that somebody can search back through to hear what I'm
Yeah.
saying, right? I'm interacting with a ton of people. I have a Discord community and we chat on there all the time about about the books and about life and about everything. And I'm interacting with people on Facebook and I'm interacting with them on Patreon, but I don't have a way of storing my thoughts, right? And so it started as sort of a video diary of like, I really want to codify what it is that I'm doing as an author. And YouTube seems to be the best thing. And
Yeah.
then as I started getting into it, I was like, you know what? Um, I'm not very good at this. And I'm not very good at it because I haven't done it enough. But I'm also not
Mhm.
willing to put in the time to do it myself. So I hired an
Okay.
editor for my videos. And he I just give him content and he edits it and he puts it up and he does the thumbnails and he does all the stuff. And so all I have to do is like record the actual video itself. And that has made it possible for me to kind of keep YouTube going. We got, a thousand subscribers this year, which is pretty cool. We're
Yeah.
excited about
Over
that.
1,000 within a year. So
Yeah. So pretty excited about that. And we're about to start cranking it up. I'm about to start really pushing again my incessant and obsessive need to optimize has has struck again. And so we are in the process of building out the system for the model for cranking YouTube to the next level. So hopefully there will be more content coming soon in the next month or so.
And you and I were talking about this at Dragon Con, where there was a very specific type of video that you started to see really gain traction. That kind of really shifted your vector of what some of this content is going to be. Do you mind talking about that?
Yeah, so I've been noticing a couple of things. And one of them was that I just didn't want to be a book talker or
Right.
a booktuber, sorry, because I don't have time to read other people's books in a way like as a reader. And what we were just talking about, right? I don't have time for that. And so um it's really hard to like give a critical review as a reader when I'm not reading as a reader. I'm reading as an
Right.
author. And that's just a different mindset.
Yep.
Um but I have been putting out content that was sort of like, hey, this is how I do the thing.
Mhm.
This is how I'm putting this is everything I've learned and this is again giving it away for free. Just this is how I went from being an amateur, someone who aspired to write, an aspiring author, I guess is what you would call it, to being a full-time author. And
Mhm.
those videos have done very well, but specifically the videos where am I'm not trying to like, I guess they feel less salesy. Videos where I'm just sort of talking about my life and my experiences and the stories that I have around writing. Um, but specifically, also, like, again, pulling back the curtain and
Hmm.
just saying, this is exactly step by step what I did, how I did it,
Yep.
right? So, like I said, I just put out not too long ago a video um, on the model that I use, and
Hmm.
there's a download, like there's a PDF there that you can download to see the model, and I explain it going through there. And I'm probably going to be doing more and more of that kind of stuff.
Right.
Um, like you, I'm also very interested in um, self improvement, and I feel like
Hmm.
self improvement gets a bad rap. It's like people hear that term and they sort of groan and they're like, okay. But what I'm really interested in is the mental models that people use in order
Yep.
to operate, and I'm really committed in myself to using the best mental model possible.
Yep.
And so I'm happy to share that with like what worked for me, right?
Hmm.
How do I motivate myself to write when I don't want to write? How do
Yeah.
I, what sort of mental model do I use to keep myself relatively immune to bad reviews? Because I get bad reviews, like everybody gets bad reviews, right? It's
Yeah.
just, it comes with the territory. So how do you keep yourself sort of above it? At the same time, how do you keep yourself from obsessing about the good reviews and letting
Mm.
them dictate your attitude, you know?
Yeah.
So I love that kind of stuff, and so I'm always, like, just shoving it into my videos, like, whether you want it or not, here it's coming.
Well, I wanted to
Yeah,
make sure we highlighted that for future viewers who see this video and are truly that aspiring of like, how did this work for Seth? Like,
mhm.
these are the types of videos that you will be coming out with very soon.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
learn from one of the best. Learn from someone who truly worked his ass off, got to a point that he's full time, and still is pushing himself to get better and better. Um, so yeah, definitely make sure you go subscribe to your channel.
Thank you.
What's interesting is you brought something else up, and this was something that I saw on an Instagram reel where one of the things that I started doing back in June was I printed up 3 separate columns on a Word doc,
Mhm.
and it was, I am a great writer. I am a great storyteller. I am I have a great smile. I am very genuine. 3 columns, and every day I went into the bathroom, and after I got done, washing up or whatever, I stood there and I knew it would take me 2 minutes, but I
Mhm.
verbally out loud told myself that. And I had to do it for about a month, and I haven't done it in about 2 weeks. The reason I haven't, or excuse me, I haven't done it in over a month. And the reason why is because my headset, my mind, my mental and spiritual state is at the point where my mind is not questioning those things anymore.
That's right.
Right. And
Yeah.
so I am fully supportive of that. And what I found, or what this other Instagram person was talking about, was when you are starting to make positive changes in your life, the people that are against that are either dealing with that themselves and they don't have the
Mhm.
power to change, or they don't want you to change because they don't want to lose the comfortableness that they have with you.
That's right.
They're reliant on you being within their circle to keep them balanced out. But when
Right.
you are starting to make positive changes, you're doing this for yourself. They're not going along with you. Therefore, they're
Yeah.
upset.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, becoming successful in anything is one of the loneliest things you can do.
Yep.
because every time you move forward, you are leaving people behind.
Yep.
And one of the hardest things to do is maintain relationships with someone who does not want to change. At the same time, one of the greatest advantages you can have is a group of people pushing you to do better, right?
Yep.
There's a reason that gym bros are gym bros. It's because they're bros. Like they're
Yeah.
all together doing it, right?
Yeah.
And like they go and they show up and it's like they know each other, right? This is
Yeah.
the same for anything though, right? It's not just
Right.
the gym. It's like if you're on a bowling league, do you know why you get better at bowling? Because those people expect you to show up and they expect you to play your best, right?
Yep.
And you do that every single time, week in and week out, you just do it, right?
Yep.
The but if you don't have that group of people that are pushing you forward. In fact, I literally am I just talked about this in a video that will probably come out in a couple of weeks because of the way our schedule works, but how important it is to make those social connections as an author, to have people who are going to push you forward, to have people
Yes.
who are not just where you are, but are a step behind and a step ahead, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's how you continue to grow and get better is through those relationships and also through being willing to just put your head down and grind and be like,
Yep.
I understand that maybe you can't see the vision that I have for my life. I understand that you don't get what I'm trying to do, but you will someday.
Yeah.
Whether you're okay with it or not is a different story, but you will understand someday because I will achieve it. I'm getting
Yeah.
there. I'm gonna do it.
You know,
So,
I
yeah.
I was talking to another author actually after Dragon Con. I don't want to say who it was, just because I don't know how they would take. It wasn't bad. I just don't know. What we were talking about though was the average of 5.
Hmm.
You are the average of 5.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I used to tell this to my troops and everything else. If you are surrounding yourself with tactical couch potatoes, you are going to turn into a tactical couch potato.
Yep.
So when you want to make changes in your life, if you want to go into fit, now I truly believe you can have multiple circles,
Yeah.
right? So when I go to the gym, I want to surround myself with the 5 people that are going to push myself in the gym. When I want to do finances, surround myself with the best financial people that will give me what I need to grow.
That's right.
As you grow along this, or as you climb this Mount Everest of your journey, you may find you're getting to a point where, hey, I need to remove someone out of this circle
Yeah.
and I need to add someone in. If the person is mature enough, they will understand, I still love you, I still care about you.
Right.
But if I'm traveling at 50 miles an hour and you're only able to travel at 10, I need someone who can keep up with my pace. It
Right.
doesn't mean you can't be in the circle later once
Right.
you get up to 50 miles an hour. But for right now, my growth, I need to modify the circle to keep pushing myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And the just sort of the natural cadence of it is that if you're going 50 miles an hour and somebody else is going 10, that you either stop, and wait for them to catch up, or you slow down to their pace, or they will just naturally be left behind. And
Yeah.
like you said, there are a lot of people who find that very uncomfortable because
Hmm.
they're relying on you for something, whether it's that emotional stability or whether it's um, something else. They're relying on you not changing
Right.
to give their life stability.
Yep. And that's where necessary endings,
Hmm.
because again, like sometimes it's those, oh, well, I don't want to. He talks in so many different ways from business to romantic relationships where, oh, well, I just don't want to let them go. It's like, but one, you're not going to be able to progress if you hold on to this.
Hmm.
And if you make this cut, hopefully they'll see their need to progress as well. And that's
Right.
what you're trying to do, is both people progress in positive ways.
Yeah.
So so it's
Absolutely.
like, hey, you're going 10 miles an hour, let's cut it here.
Yeah.
And then you realize, oh, they're now able to get to 20.
Right.
Once we severed that, they were able to progress differently. So it's like, well, there's
Yeah.
that.
And even just reframing is helpful, right? Reframing relationships, reframing,
Yes.
um, and understanding that there are seasons in life for everything. Because
Yep.
there was a period of my life where I've always really enjoyed games. One of the reasons I write lit RPG. I played Warhammer 40K for a
Oh
long
yeah.
time, and I played very aggressively. And what I mean by that is like traveling to tournaments and like doing the whole thing. I played a lot.
You played with
And
Nick Coons, didn't you?
yeah,
Okay.
so I I was playing like at least once, maybe twice, three times a week at one point, right before my career took off.
Okay.
And I remember one Thursday, because we met on Thursday nights, right? And I get in my car after work and it's like, I can go and play a game of Warhammer. My game had fallen through. So like the guy who was going to come and play against me couldn't make it. I was like, so my match had fallen through and I was like, all right, I know there are people there. I could go and get another game, right? Or I could just do what I normally did in that situation and go and like see what other people are doing and strategize with people and talk to people about the game and all the fun things that I love doing. And then I didn't. I got in my car, I drove home, and I wrote. And the next
Mhm.
Thursday, somebody posted and was like, "Hey, you want to get a game in?" And I was like, "No." And I went home and I wrote. And I went from playing Warhammer literally multiple times a week to playing maybe once a month, to within 5 months not playing at all. And 2 years later, I caught up with some of the guys from that club. And guess what they were all doing? For
Playing
better or
Warhammer.
worse, they were playing Warhammer, right? And I was not. I had done the thing that all of us had talked about doing. We had all talked about doing creative things. We had all talked about doing things besides the jobs that we had, right?
Yep.
Wouldn't it be cool to do this, that, or the other thing?
Mm.
And every single one of them was still just going to the
Talking.
club, playing Warhammer, and talking about the
Yep.
cool things they wanted to do. And and that was a very real, that was the first time I realized that if I wanted different outcomes, I had to put in different actions.
Yeah. 100%. Dude, I literally talked about that on my last update on Saturday. Was there are talkers and there's doers. And I saw it in the military all the time. You see it on TikTok and all the other social medias where it's like, oh,
Yeah.
here I am. I'm just writing. I got to my 40,000. Okay. Eventually, you want to find the doers.
Yep.
Get with the doers. And so, I talked about that whole circle, the average of 5. And we're talking about, oh, there's people that talk about stuff. And that was one of the things I loved about Dragon Con is I sat down with Michael Chetfield,
Hmm.
sat down with Lars, and that's where I'm like, okay, magic system, this. And when you have those other authors, here's what I'm working on mentally. Here's what I'm writing down and developing my next 1,000,000-word project that
Hmm.
will probably not be written for 2-3 years, but I'm developing it now. What am I missing?
Right.
And you get to have those people as you start to plug and play that circle to rely on that are going to push you better. Of like, okay, TJ, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
How would this work?
Right.
So yeah, surround yourself with those people that are going to do this stuff to push you
Yeah.
better.
And not only are going to, but have done, right?
Yes.
Because because that's like when, again, man, Dragon Con was so great, and 20 Books has been so great, and I love just going and meeting people, and it's amazing how, like, the idea of someone as successful as Chatfield giving any of us the time of day in
Mm,
another industry is like, no, that wouldn't happen, right?
yeah.
But he's totally there and willing to just be like, hey, let me talk to you about it,
Yeah.
right? Let me tell you what I'm doing, what has worked, what hasn't worked. Let me break down, let me hear what you're doing, because maybe I can learn something, but then let me be able to give you good feedback on it. You
Yep.
know, it's just, man, I love,
Chatfield's very much like you and I,
I
where
love the
like
community.
he and I sat down, we got interrupted on both occasions. But for at least 30, 40 minutes,
Yeah.
we had talks like this of like, because of course he was Canadian military,
Right.
I'm American military, so we have that connection. We're very health mindset. Like right
Mhm.
now, I am probably within the next month, my goal is to get rid of all processed oils out of my food diet.
Okay.
So, certain things like that where
Right.
we get to talk on more deeper personal connections, and
Yeah.
exactly that, lit RPG authors in the community are so genuine towards one another.
Oh man, it's great. It really is a cool community. And I don't know that I've ever experienced anything like it. Like, it's, yeah.
Dude, man, so kind of what Ryan's saying, isn't it amazing what defines success? I'd
Mhm.
absolutely say that compared to me, you are a super successful star, but you still have people who are idols in your eyes and the epitome of success.
Yeah, it's, the there are levels to it, right?
Right.
Um, and there's always levels to it. Um, but what I would say is that success is what you make of it. And
Hmm.
if you are if you are starting out and you're getting your words in, like, that's success. You
Yep.
are building you are building your success right there. If you're pulling the trigger and actually publishing,
Yep.
success. If you're engaging with people, the difference between, you know, like, dollars aside, the difference between one 5-star review and a million 5-star reviews ain't that far. Like, really, honestly, if you can engage one person with a book and have them love it,
Yep.
success. And
Yep.
so I just, yeah, but there are levels. There are levels to it, and it's been so cool getting the opportunity to, like, engage with people who I see who are ahead of me. Um and they're the ones, you give credit where credit is due. They're the ones who really have set the tone of this community,
Right.
you know, of and indie in general. Like, there are bad apples everywhere you go, but indie in general, people are just friendly. People are willing to share what they know and help out because they haven't, like, we're all just struggling to figure it out. you know
Right.
they're they're just trying to figure out what works, and we do it together.
Yep.
So
100%. I look at it, Master Chief Nasty Nash, that was his nickname. He was one of the first 50 people that started Navy SEALs. And I lived 4 trailers down from him at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And one day the colonel walks up and he's like, TJ, how's Heroes Row? What are you talking about, Heroes Row? He's like, well, aren't you at the fam camp? I was like, yeah. It's like, do you realize how many heroes you're living next to? I was like, he's like, dude, have you met Nasty yet? And I'm like, no. He's like, okay, go down to this spot number and
yeah.
tell him that Jamie sent you. I was like, I'm allowed to call the colonel by his first name? Like, okay. So sure enough, I go down to the trailer, I knock on the door, and here this older guy opens up and he's like, yeah, what's going on? I'm looking for Nasty, and Jamie said to come say hi. And he's like, oh, Jamie? All right, let's sit down at the picnic table. So we sit down, and here he starts sharing the story with me and sharing his life and some of the missions he did as a Navy SEAL. But one of the biggest things that I always took back is how he said, TJ, when we were in Navy SEALs, we never thought we were better than anyone else. I may have been the best runner, but George was the best shot on the marksman range.
Right.
Alan was the best swimmer. This guy was the best demolition expert. This guy was the best medic. So every day I showed up saying, I don't want to be better than him. I want to be just as good as him.
Right.
I want to be just as good as him. So we constantly push ourselves to get better. And that's the way I've looked at it, as like, I want to be just as good as this person with this. I want to be just as good as this person with this. So you're always pushing yourself to get better.
Yeah. And you're always, rounding out those areas where you're weak. You're always being honest and realistic that, you do have areas where you can improve.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, Ryan made sure to say thanks for Battle Mage Farmer. He loves it, and we'll definitely check out the next series on his TBR.
Thank you for reading.
So yeah, absolutely. Well, dude, I know you definitely have a family, you have a life, and you have another 13 books to write this year, so you probably have to get up early. For those of you still
I only
watching,
have 6 to go.
Oh, okay.
I'm doing pretty well.
So for those of you who have any final questions for Seth, be sure to put them in the comments. And while we wait for any final questions, Seth, what would you like to talk about in closing? Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to talk about?
No, not particularly. I would love to know, though, you said you are just getting through, we were chatting a little bit before, and you said you're just getting through your editing, right?
Yeah.
So what are you writing next? And when is that coming?
What am I writing next?
Okay, yeah, what are you writing next?
Eric, thanks for coming in at the end. It's okay, dude. We're still appreciating that you're here.
Absolutely.
See you at the 5 a.m. Writers Club. So
right.
One of the things that I was really I was really surprised with book 3 of the Dying Breed series. It goes to the editor 1 October. I hit omniscient narrator, third person, and first person all in the same book. And I was like, wow, that's so terribly impressive. But book 3 is Enslavement. I love it because about half of the book is nothing but a major siege for my own custom creature. Nice. And also, when I created the Dying Breed series, it was all things fantasy. Like literally, what is probably one of your favorite things in fantasy? Creatures, race, anything.
Yeah, I like dragons. I like elves.
Dragons are in there. Elves are in there. Minotaurs, angels, demons, steampunk. It is literally all in the world of the Dying Breed. Well, I created this creature called the Fraish, and that is one of the creatures that is sieging these dwarves. And then we have Senteth, along with centaurs. And so one of the things that I always loved was, well, centaurs are normally always aligned in good. Well, what if I could take things that are normally aligned with good and actually make them aligned with evil? So therefore, you have the centaurs which transition themselves into the Senteth through demonic influence. Okay. So I'm super excited for book 3 because you get introduced to Drebin, who was a character that I did not plan. He was just naturally the one that I started to write in his point of view during the entire siege. And he's one of my favorite characters I've ever written.
Oh, I love that.
So for Call Sign Bloodbath, which is my lit RPG first person shooter, I gave him some homage in book 2. So Drebin gets to come back in a way to connect. So I'm about maybe halfway through editing. So we'll get that over in 1 October. It goes to Catherine for line editing. Hopefully it'll be out, I don't know, probably the first of the year. Okay. And then Call Sign Bloodbath. So book 2 is written, but I need to make some edits to it. Okay. So as soon as I'm done with book 3, I will jump into book 2, get that done and updated. That goes into the Patreon on 1 October.
Nice.
which will hopefully go to Royal Road on January.
Okay.
Um, and then what I will more than likely do is go back to the Dying Breed because I stopped at 70,000 words of book 4.
Okay. So you
Uh,
have some of that written already.
yeah, so I
How
was
long are those?
writing the Dying. Oh, good.
How long are those?
So the Dying Breed are almost every single one is about 100,000 words.
Are they all uniform in terms of length?
For the most part.
Okay.
For the most part. So books 2 and 3 were supposed to be one book, and I got to
Right.
basically
That's
100,000 words
right.
of book 2, and I was like, we're splitting it.
Yeah.
The thing with book 4, I felt like I didn't give the antagonist enough of a backstory to really explain it, and
Okay.
so I'm at 70,000 words, and we don't even pick up where books 2 and 3 leave off.
Oh
And
man.
so book 4 is called Cataclysm, and it's all going to be thrown in. So my biggest thing was Brian Norden, who challenged me to
Mhm.
write a lit RPG story. So
Yeah.
that's why I stopped and I wrote Bloodbath.
Yeah.
Um, I want to go and finish this first saga of the Dying Breed. I want to make
Sure.
sure it's complete.
And is that
In
4 books for the
so
first piece?
yeah, so 4 books are going to be the first saga, the God King Emmanuel saga.
Yep.
Book 5 and 6 are going to be side stories where we follow some different characters. And then the second saga is the Wrath of the Queen, which a character you meet in book 2, she's going to have her own saga, and I'm
Love
super
it.
excited about it. I do have planned out 4 origin stories to go back in time, but the final saga is the working title is War of the Celestials. So now the cool thing about it was Brian wanted me to change the Dying Breed and redo it as a lit RPG.
Mhm.
But I was like, no, I don't feel like that's the right move to make. I feel like it would be just disingenuous to the lit
Sure.
RPG readership.
Sure.
So eventually, even though I have all these other ideas, the goal is to get those 13 books of the Dying Breed done,
Mhm.
and then a lit RPG story where the character goes into the Dying Breed world.
Love it.
And when he's portaled in, the main character who meets him thinks he's a god because he has
Mhm.
all of this data and information on the world of Pentagoth,
Right.
but he doesn't have the application part down. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, actually a really cool idea, and I love and write, stories where someone has a system that nobody else in the world does. So,
yeah.
I think that's a really cool concept.
Well, what you said, right? You can only be as smart as the world. When I started out, I had no idea.
It is what
And
it is.
so
Yep.
Pentagoth is a soft magic system with cultivation, but there's no levels. It's not a
Right.
traditional progression fantasy. Because I was like,
Right.
okay, if you're cultivating from the spirit plane, well, what happens if there's not a whole lot of spirit energy within that area? What do you
Right.
do? So that's where I was like, you know what? You don't have to have a hard magic system. You don't have to have skill progression. Tell the story how you want it, need it to be
Yep.
told,
And
and
again,
then grow from there.
and move forward and write a
Yep.
better next book, right? And, write the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, man. So, um, more than likely, I'm going to be changing up my work parameters where I'll be going back to a 9 to 5
Okay.
for some stability. But it's one of those things
Sure.
where I've already got done the whole routine of getting up at 3 a.m. So
Yep.
my goal is at least 4 to 6 books a year. We'll
Love it.
have fun. We'll get to write
Yeah.
what we want to write.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of I was actually just talking to an author who's doing something similar, um,
Yep.
who's saying, "Hey, I really just want to be able to write what I want to write, and that means that maybe I also work another job, but that's okay because the goal with all of this, and can't stress this enough. I know too many authors who are miserable because they feel locked into having to write a specific thing in
Yep.
order to make the money they need to do it full time. It's like, why kill yourself? Just go back, like get another job, but then write what you want to write for fun.
Yeah.
Quality of life is so much more important.
Yeah.
So much more important.
Well, Eric, like I was saying, man, so let's just simple math here, right? Let me get out the calculator. Even though it's a simple math, I definitely struggle. So
hey, there's a reason I am not a mathematician. I am an author. I don't do
right.
math either.
So if we just do 50 weeks, we're going to times 50 weeks by 5 days, right? So that's 250 days. So out of 250 days, if I can write 2,500 words, that's 625,000 words.
There you go.
And it's like, I think
Like
Seth and I are,
six
you
books
do
per
very
month.
similar, where about 2,500 word chapters, and you keep a fast
Almost
pace
exactly.
of chapters.
Yep.
And that's where
47
like even
chapters per book
Yep.
gives me the slight overage gives me 120,000 words.
Yep. And so that's where in my skills, in book 3, I had an 86-page chapter because I thought it was super cool. Like, oh, huge chapters. A year later now, I'm like, oh, that's super intimidating. And that's cut them down. You get faster, you get all this. So that's where also, as you start writing, 2,500 words in a day, like you can write that in an hour.
Yeah. If you're, if you're focused and you know what you're doing, you can really optimize.
Yep.
You can really optimize this.
Yeah. So, all right, guys. Well, hey,
exciting.
That's so exciting. Thanks everyone for coming and hanging out, man.
Yeah,
Seth,
absolutely.
Dude, thanks so much, dude. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I'll have to come back sometime. These conversations are great.
Dude, you're welcome back anytime you want. So open invite. But
Thank
all right,
you.
guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. We're going to send the end stream video, and then we will see you guys this upcoming Sunday. We have Brett Humphrey, he's got 9 books under his belt. I have read his first one. What I love about his books is that they're kid-friendly, teen-focused. So really excited to talk to him. So this upcoming Sunday at 6 p.m. And then, of course, Saturday, I will see you guys for the standard weekly updates. Peace, everyone.